Do I think that Britain is facing an existential crisis? Absolutely not. Right? I think this is, in historical terms, despite challenges, Britain basically has never been so peaceful, never been so healthy, never been so educated. And people are talking about it as though we're on the verge of some sort of civil war or societal collapse, which I think is ridiculous.
Well, where's that idea coming from if it's so patently absurd? Why is it that people are talking in that way?
Well, I think I'm guilty of doing this occasionally too, and other things. It's to do with what you're obsessed with.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly capable of implying that Boris Johnson represents an existential threat to the British Constitution because he's prorogued Parliament, because he's broken the ministerial code. And of course, many of my friends will be very close to suggesting that Donald Trump represents kind of Adolf Hitler. Now, of course, step back for a moment. Obviously, Donald Trump is not Adolf Hitler, right? Obviously, Boris Johnson is not enacting some version of the English Civil War, right? So this is partly hyperbole, it's partly paranoia, it's partly emotion, it's partly the way in which we construct our world. And it seems to me, looking at almost any newspaper over the last 100 years, we are addicted to a sense of crisis. I tell myself a nice story that, in the 1990s and early 2000s, we were in a lovely age of a liberal global order and sort of Fukuyama, the end of history. But actually, if you were to read the newspapers in the period, people are absolutely terrified about umpteen different sorts of things.
There's always something that's about to end the world.
Yeah.
It's either some religious fervor, maybe it's Y2K, maybe it's AI, maybe it's the environment. There's always something.
Nuclear annihilation.
Yeah.
It was, in the 70s and 80s, lots of people really found it difficult to sleep.
And not irrationally.
Yeah.
Is the thing to point out, I think. I don't think I think it would be unfair to, we can look historically and say that, okay, it makes sense to be scared of these things, but on the whole, maybe our fears in each individual instance were slightly exaggerated. But I think if you spoke to one of those people, especially if they were in that world, and said to them, I just think you're putting too much emphasis on this. I don't think it's causing the threat that you think it is.
Yeah.
I guess it would be a hard sell, and maybe that's why it's a hard sell to Sam Harris as well.
Yeah, it's a very hard sell. And climate is a really good example at the moment. So there are a number of energy economists and engineers out there at the moment, ranging from Dieter Helm to Vasav Smil, who are essentially saying that the notion that we're going to be able, technically, financially, to make a transition to net zero by 2030 is for the birds. And yet, if you were to say that to somebody for whom climate is the existential issue of our age, they would find that profoundly offensive. And they wouldn't be placated by figures. You couldn't say, yes, but this is the transmission capacity, this is the battery capacity, this is the intermittency of the renewables, this is the projected cost. These are the steps that would be required to achieve net zero by 2030. So it's not going to happen, is it? Because they will feel that this is something that is so important that all that talk is read by them as just being in bad faith. And the same will be true for people listening to me and Sam. I got a few responses on social media to my interview in which people said, fundamentally, Rory Stewart just doesn't like Jews, or Rory Stewart is compassionate to everything except Israel. Now, I don't know whether I even mentioned those subjects. I might have done in passing, maybe in the context of giving other analogies.
Certainly not significantly, not that I remember.
But that is how it's read.
Yeah.
And that was how it's read by, the first 3 or 4 comments, I think, on Twitter. And other people will say, I was very disappointed that Sam put this guy on the show because obviously Rory Stewart's not very smart and he's not very good at arguing, whereas Sam is obviously a much more logical, thoughtful. Right? What's going on there? I don't know. I mean, maybe an element of truth in this, but it may also be that actually we are perpetually fooling ourselves, particularly people who listen to these kinds of podcasts, into thinking that we are these hyper-rational kind of, I don't know, we're all sort of Dr. Spock and the whole thing is going to,
The full conversation with Rory Stewart is available via the link on your screen. If you want to get early access to episodes and get them ad-free, then support the channel at patreon.com/AlexOC. If you liked that episode, subscribe. If you didn't, subscribe anyway. See you in the next one.